Well, greetings and fall blessings to you all. My name is Emilee Williams, and I'm coming to you from Arlington, Virginia, in my cozy little book nook here, my little at-home library. And I minister in the National Capital Presbytery as a campus minister at George Mason University and Northern Virginia Community Colleges through Arise Campus Ministry. Now, if you look up on our website or you somehow were to track down our hard copy records of our ministry's history, eventually you would come across our mission statement. Today, in 2022, our mission statement speaks to our belief in Jesus Christ, our commitment to inclusivity, and our investment to our campus context. Chances are, your church or your ministry organization also has a beautifully crafted mission statement of its own, something that speaks about God's love, about the redemption of God's world, and the church's role in that. Chances are, it's a beautifully crafted mission statement, and it helps your church in decision making and discernment, guiding you like a map. Well, when it comes to capital C Church, all the collection of churches in the Presbyterian Church USA, we also have our own ways of expressing our mission to keep us on track and to guide our ministry in our world. One of those ways that we express this is through the 6 great ends of the church, a list of different aspects of the church's mission in all times in our world. It's so central to our church's work, in fact, that it's in the Book of Order's very first chapter of its very first section, appropriately titled, The Mission of the Church. Now, in this short video, I'm only unpacking one great end, the shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the people of God. More videos are to come in this series that will unpack for us the other ends of the church, ends like the maintenance of divine worship or the promotion of social righteousness. But even still, if all that I'm doing is unpacking one end out of 6, why have I spent these first few minutes drawing us back to all 6 of them? Why start with this big contextual introduction? Well, that's a great question. The answer is you can't really talk about one of the ends without also talking about all the other ones. In other words, they work together. They work in unity with each other. They can't really stand on their own. Just as in our own life, we might have seasons where we thrive in certain areas and need little pushes and extra oomphes in other areas of our life and our faith. The church works in the same way. Maybe our Sunday morning worship is strong, but our community engagement, our works of justice in our community are lacking. You can fill in the blanks for your own community or your own church however you fall, but the point is all of these work together. We need all 6 great ends to keep us grounded as God's church. So as we unpack the second great end, remember that it sits within a larger critical whole that guides the church in her ministry. So what is this second great end then? As we read in the foundations, it's the shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the people of God. Now there's 3 words in this one short sentence that I want to draw attention to and unpack. And as I do, I invite you to think to yourself what comes to your mind when you hear each word. The first word is shelter, the shelter of the children of God. Now, when I think of this word, you can also be thinking for yourself, when I think of this word, I immediately think of a lovely fall picnic interrupted by sudden rainfall, and you have to run to the nearest shelter. It signifies protection from the elements. It signifies protection from danger, a safe haven, a safe place to reside. Our second word, the nurture of the children of God. What comes to your mind here? For me, what comes to my mind is a parent with a child. I think of compassionate care, of gentleness, of a loving relationship where someone's well-being and their growth is fostered. And finally, our last word. What comes to your mind when you hear the word fellowship? This comes from our very final clause, the spiritual fellowship of the children of God. For me, I immediately think of everything from our beloved coffee hour or our church's potlucks or community gatherings to the wider church's unity, the sense of commonality that is God's church. I think of connection and conversation, of checking in, of caring, of the community that is church, present here today, past and future. I think of all God's people in fellowship together. So the real question is, what do we get when we put these three words together? Well, the church is meant to shelter all of God's people, to be a safe haven from the storms of our world, whether those are actual physical storms or storms of societal injustices. The church protects those who are marginalized. The church houses those who are unhomed. It shields those in harm's way. And beyond that, the church works for the spiritual growth of God's people, the development of all of God's children, whether in faith-specific ways or beyond. The church is always fostering the well-being of God's people. And finally, the church is where we come together for this work, this mission, and this care. It's where all of us have a place of belonging as God's children and live into that unity together. It's a pretty important end of the church when we put it that way. But remember, there's a bigger picture we can't miss. So for this last minute, let's go back real quickly to where we started and situate the second end alongside the others. You know, I love how one Presbyterian minister, Mark Hines, puts it as he analyzes the second end in dialogue with others. As important as the second end is, he says, emphasizing this alone, emphasizing just the spiritual fellowship and nurture of God's people, it risks the church becoming introverted or disconnected or even self-seeking, concerned only for its own shelter, its own nurture, and its own fellowship. But on the other hand, emphasizing other ends at the expense of this important end can risk us leading into acts of justice and acts of great community efforts that are actually devoid of the very grace that we claim to offer. In other words, without this end, our efforts as God's church can become increasingly tiresome in lack of firm well of God's grace from which we can minister, from which we can drink, from which we are sustained. What makes this end so important is that it speaks to the way the church ensures all God's people are cared for, so that the church can be sent out to minister to others. It's a beautiful tapestry of God's grace for all God's people. Stay tuned for the next video on the next great end of the church.